The 31-year-old documents dealer is accused of killing Stephen Christensen and Kathleen Sheets to cover up an elaborate fraud and forgery scheme. Most testimony from the state's 39 witnesses has centered on a possible motive that involves hundreds of thousands of dollars in what prosecutors say are fraudulent transactions. The real problem started in April of 1985 when coin dealer Al Russ paid $150,000 for the controversial McClellan collection. The collection was to be delivered to the coin shop but never arrived. The money was used to pay outstanding bills. An investment group headed by Thomas Wilding gave Hofmann $160,000 on May 9th for the Charles Dickens Haunted Man manuscript. Much of the money, though, went to Hofmann's uncle. The manuscript was never purchased and, in fact, was sold to someone else. The next month, Hofmann was again peddling the McClellan collection. The LDS Church arranged a $185,000 bank loan, believing Hofmann would use the money to buy the collection. Most of the money, though, went to coin dealer Al Rust to pay a long overdue bill. Hofmann still owed Rust more than $132,000, money Rust had paid to buy the McClellan collection. In September, the Wilding Group gave Hofmann another $173,000 to buy a second copy of The Oath of a Free Man. Hofmann gave $100,000 of that to Deseret Book to pay an old bill. $40,000 went to his uncle and $18,000 was given back to the investors who wanted out of the deal. Hofmann's outstanding debts now totaled nearly $700,000. There was extreme pressure. The church wanted the bank loan paid. Some testified that the church was threatening excommunication. Al Rust wanted his money, but the Wilding Group was applying the most pressure. Hofmann promised to pay them $160,000 on October 16th. The church had a buyer for the McClellan collection. Hofmann would be paid $185,000, enough to pay off the bank loan. The church wanted Steve Christensen to authenticate the collection before paying Hofmann. Christensen died in a bomb blast October 15th, just 2 hours before he was to examine the collection. Police recovered a box of Macmillan papers from Hofmann's car. Investigators believe they were to be passed off as the McClellan collection, but they say an expert like Steve Christensen surely would have known the difference. This is Jack Ford, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
About a month ago, Mark Hofmann's attorneys received a letter from prosecutors outlining a deal. Hofmann pleads guilty, and in turn, the county attorney's office reduces murder and documents fraud charges. Insiders say the proposal changes as negotiations proceed, but here's its general shape. The original charges of 2 first-degree murder counts and 28 document fraud counts would be reduced. First-degree murder would have been punishable by life imprisonment, possibly execution. Those would be replaced with 2 second-degree murder charges punishable by 5-year to life sentences. And Hofmann would plead guilty to at least 2 counts of documents fraud, perhaps involving the Oath of a Free Man, the Salamander Letter, or the Anthon transcript. Eyewitness News has learned that the plan also calls for one of the murder charges being further reduced to a second-degree felony at the time of sentencing. One source said that was done to make it appear prosecutors had not given so much away at the time of the plea change. Finally, part of the bargain reportedly requires Hofmann to answer prosecutor questions about parts of the puzzle they've been unable to solve. Former County Attorney Ted Cannon, who would not go on camera, disagrees with David Yoakum's apparent decision to plea bargain. He says, blowing up people with bombs is outrageous. It's the worst, most egregious homicide we've had around here. To plea bargain down is inappropriate. Prosecutors consulted with families and law enforcement officials before disclosing to the court they were attempting to settle the case without trial. Cannon said, "I'm surprised the families would sit still for it." Parties to the prosecution say the county has a good circumstantial case, but they believe not good enough to assure victory with a jury. They still allegedly cannot prove a motive for the Kathy Sheets bombing and for whom the third bomb was intended. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News.
The Salamander Letter is phony. Mark Hofmann admitted that today. But we won't know for sure the authenticity of other Hofmann documents until prosecutors debrief the convicted killer sometime in the next 30 days. It's likely, though, they too are forged.
All of our investigation points to the conclusion that every document that we have charged have been manufactured by Mark Hofmann.
Prosecutors credit forensic expert George Throckmorton with breaking the forgery case. He doubts we'll ever know the full extent of Hofmann's forgeries.
After we learned the techniques he used, if I were to go into that profession myself full-time, there's no reason I couldn't turn out a couple of hundred a year.
Hofmann spent most of a decade fooling experts as well as the curious with his disclosures, and Throckmorton believes Hofmann's scam would have worked, except,
Like so many other criminals, he became greedy.
Hofmann's phony discovery sent historians scrambling to restudy early Mormon history. But noted historian Leonard Arrington doesn't think Hofmann altered the writing of Mormon history.
I don't know of anything that has been written into a full-blown history that incorporates any of this information. It's much too new.
You look like you're mending well.
Mark Hofmann once stood as a recognized expert in the mysterious business of Mormon documents dealing. Tonight he stands a convicted swindler, while the people he duped are counting their losses and reflecting on the lessons they've learned. Dwayne Cardall, Eyewitness News.
Everyone was there, the attorneys, the victims' families, and of course the defendant, Mark Hofmann. They all crowded into the small courtroom and waited. As they waited, Hofmann spoke quietly with his father. Finally, Judge Kenneth Rigtrup entered, and it was time for Mark Hofmann to admit he killed Steve Christensen and Kathleen Sheets. The plea bargain arrangement required Hofmann to plead guilty only to second-degree murder, sparing him a full trial and a possible death sentence. How long Hofmann actually remains in prison depends on the Board of Pardons. But in his sentencing, Judge Rigtrup recommended that Hofmann stay behind bars for the rest of his life because of the, quote, indiscriminate way in which he killed his victims. That recommendation prompted Salt Lake County Sheriff Pete Hayward to defend the county's decision to enter a plea bargain with Hofmann.
Well, personally, I don't believe that even if the case had gone to trial, we'd have got any more than a second-degree murder or a life imprisonment. And I think that's been accomplished today. I think the way this has been developed, the way they went about the plea bargaining, has been the way that plea bargaining should take place. And that's in the courtroom with the full concurrence of the court and the families of the victims.
This morning, Hofmann also admitted he sold fake or non-existent Mormon historical documents, resulting in 2 felony theft by deception convictions. In return, prosecutors dropped the remaining 26 forgery charges. Hofmann must also tell county investigators everything he knows about the bombings and the forgeries, and that's a part of the agreement investigators say they can't wait to get started on. Dave Schmertz, Eyewitness News.
These are the kind of binders.
For the first time, the investigators were able to open their files, review the evidence, and talk about an extremely difficult case.
We've never had a case like this before. It's taken its toll on me, as I think it has other members of the team. And quite frankly, I don't believe I'll ever be involved in an investigation like this in my career. I don't think there is a case like this that will ever come down the pike again.
5,000 reports and computer printouts detailed a complicated case of murder and forgery. The trail of clues began with the name Mike Hansen, an alias discovered in the Hofmann home.
The Mike Hansen name was not only used to purchase bomb parts by Mark Hofmann, he also used that name to order plates for the printing of forged antique documents.
Mark Hofmann spent 7 years creating the forgeries that rocked the documents world.
I think Mark Hofmann was an excellent forger. I think the evidence in this case and the amount of people that he dealt with demonstrates that, and I think he'll probably go down in history as the most prolific forger in any time.
Documents expert George Throckmorton revealed the forgeries, giving the investigators the motive for the murders.
He knew what they were, and in order to protect the fact that he had forged those documents, he was willing to kill for it. You know, that type of personality is only concerned not with other people, totally insensitive to the feelings of other people, only with his own self-centered interests.
After laboring over the mystery for over a year, they'll now get to question Mark Hofmann at length to fill in all the blanks.
It's the ultimate in law enforcement. I've never quite experienced it before. You have a lot of theories as to why a crime has occurred. You have a lot of evidence as to why a crime occurred, but what actually went on in the person's mind that led him up to the act of homicide, you rarely get to talk to a person about that.
They say Mark Hofmann worked alone, a clever man who left just enough clues along the way so they could unravel his twisted plot. Tom Walsh, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
After news reports tonight, reaction was swift and to the point.
I think Mark Hofmann is guilty as sin. I think he should have been brought to trial and been given the death penalty.
It's just amazing to me how somebody can get 5 years to life and other people are on death row for less than that. How somebody can blow somebody up and not get charged for, they ought to waste him.
Most people we stopped tonight felt the death penalty would be appropriate in Hofmann's case. Most said they thought justice fell victim to legal maneuvering.
I sincerely feel it's an abomination that he was free for a whole year. 2 people were dead and he was free. Now I feel that he should join those 2 people. It was wrong what he did, and he's getting off too easy.
That's terrible.
What's terrible?
The cop-out, the bargaining, Yanovich with the bargaining.
He got 5 years to life.
Big deal.
He drops you off in the van.
Shannon Flynn today heard Mark Hofmann's official admission of guilt with disbelief and shock. Associates say Flynn was the last among them to conclude Hofmann is guilty.
I didn't want to, be the first rat to jump off ship as it gets in trouble.
Are you jumping ship now?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm jumping ship, but I can easily say that the ship is sunk.
Flynn was the first suspect jailed in connection with the Salt Lake bombings. He was behind bars for 3 days awaiting arraignment on an illegal weapons possession charge. He kept Hoffmann's Uzi automatic machine gun that the 2 men shot for sport. He pled guilty and awaits sentencing.
What I believe the police thought was they found a co-conspirator and they were going to jump on him for all they're worth.
Flynn says he personally lost more than $86,000 in the sale of Hofmann forgeries.
Not only did he commit those crimes, and not only did he make me a party in committing those crimes and used me in order to perpetrate crimes on other people, after the fact, he continuously lied to me about all aspects and phases of those crimes.
Flynn hasn't spoken to Hofmann since Hoffmann's attorney cut off contact between the 2 men. Flynn says up until then, Hofmann claimed he was innocent. He said he's not sure how his friend fooled close associates, his family, and a polygraph examiner.
Now, I wonder if he was if he's psychotic or something. I mean, maybe he's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I don't know.
What did Mark Hofmann believe in terms of religion?
Well, I knew him to be atheistic. In other words, he participated in the LDS religion by tradition, but I believe that his fundamental views were essentially atheistic. In other words, he did not believe that there was particularly that there was any God.
Flynn says Hofmann continued to appear active in the LDS Church in order to facilitate his Mormon documents business. Flynn believes Hofmann was merely trying to make money and was not trying to discredit the church by selling it controversial documents. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News.
If Mark Hofmann were the average second-degree murderer, he'd be out of prison in only about 7 years. Under guidelines used by the Board of Pardons to determine how much time a prisoner should serve, and because of the way Hofmann was sentenced, he's considered an excellent candidate for early parole.
But this is not an average case.
No, indeed. Let me emphasize that as well, that I would be surprised personally if the board stayed anywhere close to the guidelines on this case.
That means the Board of Pardons, which will hear Hofmann's case within a year, will probably order Hofmann to wait another 15 or 20 years for a full parole hearing. But it also means that Judge Kenneth Rigtrip's expressed hope that Hofmann will spend the rest of his natural life in prison probably won't come true.
Frankly, I would guess that may be unlikely.
Mark, this happened so quick. Unlikely for 3 primary reasons. Hofmann is young. He's never before been convicted of a crime, and Judge Rigtrip ordered that Hofmann serve his 4 sentences concurrently, all at once, and not consecutively, one after the other. Most experts guess Hofmann will serve 20 or 25 years. If he decides to spend that time writing or talking about the bombing case, he'll do it for free. It's against the law in Utah and in 2 other states for a criminal or his family to make money selling the rights to his story. Any money paid for the bombing story would be divvied up by the state and given to the victims of Hofmann's sensational crimes. State Senator Lyle Hilliard was the author of that law.
Rather than the criminal or his lawyer or somebody he may want to sign the rights to would have an access to that money that would maybe more beneficially used for the victims.
Hofmann and his lawyers have already been offered money for the rights to the bombing's story. Defense lawyers wouldn't comment on any offers, but they said they know that under the law, only the many victims of the bombing's case can benefit from the sale of the story. Consaris, Eyewitness News.
County Attorney David Yoakum personally delivered copies of the Hofmann transcript to the county sheriff and to Police Chief Bud Willoughby. Yoakum would say virtually nothing about the transcript, which will be explained at a news conference tomorrow.
Well, just be there. Don't miss it.
Well, is there really anything that we didn't already know, at least in general terms, or will there be major surprises?
Well, I don't know what you could call a surprise. I don't know. Just be there.
Chief Willoughby believes Hofmann has not lived up to the plea bargain. He says the killer refused to meet with police detectives and discuss the murders only briefly with prosecutors. Willoughby is hoping Hofmann will change his mind, but he refused our request for an on-camera interview.
I think if you people just hold off a little bit, you may find that we're trying to work on something that may be successful, and that's all I'm going to say.
But in a telephone interview, Willoughby said most of the transcript deals with Hofmann's lesser crimes. The forgeries and documents frauds are secondary to two people being murdered in this community, Willoughby says. The families of those victims have a right to know about those murders. Unless Hofmann changes his mind, Willoughby says he won't attend the news conference. I'm not going to be a part of anything that doesn't satisfy the public. If he does not change his mind and come across and tell about the murders, then I would strongly urge Mr. Yoakum to contact the Board of Pardons and urge them to keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Yoakum won't say if he agrees. Do you know where you stand on that issue?
We'll discuss that tomorrow.
Yoakum will be the man in the hot seat because he was in charge when the plea bargain was negotiated and sold to the public. That sales effort appears to be unsuccessful. A KSL Deseret News poll of 600 Utahns shows overwhelming opposition. 69% disagree with the plea bargain and only 24% support it. John Hollenhorst, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
He didn't classify him.
Prosecutors Bob Stott and David Biggs did not record the interviews in early January, but did take detailed notes. Hofmann told the attorneys he used booby-trapped bombs because it allowed him to kill without being face-to-face with his victims. The transcripts and interviews, like the murders, were cold, impersonal, methodical. Hofmann said he purchased the components for the first two bombs 10 days before the murders, before he even knew who the victims would be. He constructed the bombs in his basement den just hours before the murders. He told prosecutors he wanted to kill Thomas Wilding because the Wilding Investment Group was pressuring him the most, but said Stephen Christensen had to die first because he feared Christensen was about to expose him as a forger. Hofmann was to turn over the controversial McClellan collection the morning of October 15th. It was Christensen who was going to authenticate the document. Christensen died in a bomb blast the same morning. Hofmann hoped his death would delay the planned sale. Hofmann said the bomb that killed Kathleen Sheets was a diversion to make the investigators think the murders were related to the financially troubled CFS Corporation. Hofmann told prosecutors he changed his mind after planning the bombs. He said he tried to call and warn the victims but could not get through. Prosecutors don't believe him.
He did say that he called up Christensen's office that morning, but you got to understand the circumstances. He placed the bomb in the door jamb of the office. For Christensen to get to the phone, he'd have to pick up the package or knock it over or something.
Hofmann told prosecutors he purchased components for the third bomb in Logan the same day the device blew up in his face. He said he constructed the bomb at a picnic table in Logan Canyon and then drove to the Deseret Gym in Salt Lake City. Hofmann claims he was distraught over the killings the day before, so he put the bomb on the driver's seat and connected two wires to set off the explosion and commit suicide. But prosecutors, detectives, and at least one judge don't buy the suicide story.
I personally don't believe that the third bomb was a suicide bomb.
D'Elia says Hofmann didn't have the courage to kill his victims in person, so he wouldn't have the courage to kill himself. D'Elia also points out that Hofmann was not acting like a despondent man.
And why was he still trying to manipulate? Why was he still trying to get money together? Once you've resigned yourself to suicide, and if in fact you constructed that third bomb for suicide, you wouldn't be doing anything else on Wednesday morning.
Investigators say the third bomb was probably intended for a third victim, maybe Brent Ashworth, Al Rust, or Thomas Wilding, all people he swindled. They say it may have just been another diversion. As part of the plea bargain, Hofmann agreed to give full details about the murders, and reporter Dave Schmertz says a growing number of people think Hofmann didn't keep his side of the deal.
The whole deal hinged on Hofmann agreeing to, quote, answer truthfully and completely all questions said attorneys may have on any or all of the charged offenses. And that was the county's biggest selling point to an anxious public thirsty for details of Hofmann's violent crimes.
This law enforcement and prosecution team effort has brought this case to a successful conclusion and will provide the public with information that a trial or series of trials may not have provided. That is the complete truth and all the circumstances behind the murders, forgeries, and thefts.
So the bottom line is, did they get the, quote, complete truth about the murders, forgeries, and thefts? Well, that depends on who you talk to. For weeks, prosecutors complained that in the prison interviews, Hofmann refused to discuss the murders at all. They say he and his attorney, Ron Yangich, unfairly balked at their request that a police detective handle the questioning.
It was Mr. Stott and Mr. Biggs' joint belief an agreement had been made with Mr. Yangich to allow police participation in the homicide portion of the interviews.
This idea that he was unwilling to answer those questions is just it's a bunch of hoo-ha. It's not true. And I want the public I want that to be clear. My client has performed to the limit of his ability, and they've had every opportunity.
Why didn't we get the full disclosure on the homicide before we allowed him to plead?
During today's press conference, Salt Lake County Sheriff Pete Hayward bitterly complained about the whole plea bargain arrangement, arguing that the county attorney is missing the whole point.
It all goes back again. The lever on Hofmann has been waived when they allowed him to plead before we had an opportunity to say, all right, do we believe you or don't we believe you? Or have you cleaned the slate? That's done. He can now play with us any way he wants.
Following the conference, Salt Lake Police Chief Bud Willoughby echoed Hayward's complaint.
We basically told the public, when we get all this, it should satisfy all your concerns. To me, we've only got a portion of it.
Yoakum says he still thinks he and Yangich can work out a deal for prosecutors to interview Hofmann about the murders. But if that doesn't happen, what does Yoakum plan to do about it? According to court records, if prosecutors are satisfied he lived up to his end of the bargain, they'll tell that to the Board of Pardons and make no other recommendation about how long to keep him in prison. But if they're not satisfied with his answers, they can make any recommendation they want. So if they don't re-interview Hofmann, what will Yoakum tell the Board of Pardons?
Well, I think it'll have to state what the situation is at the time, and we don't know that at this time.
For nearly 2 years, it's been Utah's whodunit mystery, the topic of uncountable hours of conversation and speculation, and now television specials. Today, in page after page of the transcripts, we read how Mark Hofmann rewrote history to conform to his own interpretations. We read how he meticulously and sometimes not so meticulously forged and aged documents, duped the experts, and why. But what happened here is much, much darker than that. Yes, Hofmann captured imaginations. Yes, he shook institutions. Yes, he challenged faith. All these pages deal with that. These few pages tell how he murdered a young father, how he murdered a wife and mother of 4. No page will tell the sorrow, the pain left by those 2 interrupted lives. Nor will any transcripts do justice to lives forever changed, the lives of those left behind. Parents, children, a husband, a widow.
With me, it's with me all the time.
Terry Christensen louder now. Talk today about getting on with life and forgetting Mark Hofmann.
I don't want to waste my thoughts and energy on him. You know, I have other things, more important things to think about. He's not worth it.
5 months ago, Terry Christensen remarried. She's trying to start again. So is Gary Sheets. He too has remarried. He says forgetting is the hardest part. He is writing a book about overcoming tragedy, a book about when life isn't fair. So to all today's reports about documents and interviews and whether they were fair, let this be more than a postscript. 3 months after the bombings, the young widow bore a son. She timed the cesarean delivery to fall on her late husband's birthday and named the child Stephen F. Christensen, Jr. But for Mark Hofmann, the child would know his father, not just carry his name. And but for Mark Hofmann, Kathleen Sheets tonight would be rereading birthday cards. She would have turned 52 today.
They came together in May 1985, these Mormon historians, for their annual meeting amidst talk of a newly discovered and extremely controversial historic document dubbed the Salamander Letter. Researchers had spent months studying and analyzing the letter, and they reported their findings. Though they hedged a bit, they concluded it was authentic. The historians could hardly contain their excitement.
It seems that we now have some handles on getting at
the real folk religion of 17th, 18th, 19th century America.
What we have is a much fuller and more elaborate picture of early Mormonism.
We now have created a broader and a richer view of Joseph Smith's environment and of Joseph Smith himself.
Now we know the Salamander letter is phony, just another of Mark Hofmann's elaborate forgeries. And suddenly the historians are asking how so many of them could have been fooled.
I think that they probably wanted to believe that they were true documents, rather more so than they wanted to believe that they were not true documents.
Richard Sadler is the immediate past president of the Mormon History Association.
I think historians have ongoing wanted to put Joseph Smith in the context of the 19th century, when he lived and what he was doing. And so when letters came out that showed that he was practicing folk magic, that he was a little uncertain as to how the authority in the church should be passed, historians were saying, yeah, we ought to put this in to show Joseph's involvement.
He fooled an awful lot of people. Some of the best people in the country looked at those documents and said they were authentic.
Donald Schmidt counts himself among the people Mark Hofmann fooled. Until his retirement a couple of years ago as LDS Church archivist, Schmidt was the church's point man in dealing with Hofmann.
How did he fool you?
How did he?
Yeah.
Smooth operator.
So much of Mormonism is the fabric of the church's history, of trying to find out what really happened more than 150 years ago, of Joseph Smith and visions and the foundations of a new religion. Mark Hofmann came along with his incredible discoveries that supposedly shed new light on Mormonism's origins, and the historians and archivists issued hardly a challenge.
Here are a group of people who thought they were relatively safe from someone who would pull a scheme on them, and one of the great schemes has been pulled, not only in terms of documents. Probably people would continue to believe those documents even today if Mark Hofmann had not gotten greedy and had killed 2 people. I think it's the murder situation that's brought about totally the look into these documents. We may have had Mormon history rewritten on phony documents for ages had that not happened.
Hofmann's documents already appear as source material in a few books and papers and journals, but not many. For the most part, historians have exercised some restraint and not relied on the forged documents in their writing.
Very little showed up in any of the documents that cannot be found somewhere else.
Both Schmidt and Sadler think their colleagues have learned a valuable lesson through all of this.
Historians are now going to be much more cautious about what they accept and look much more closely at those kinds of things.
You're going to look at it more carefully, very much, a lot more carefully.
The Hofmann transcript portrays an agnostic who got a kick out of deceiving and embarrassing the LDS Church. I lost faith in the Mormon Church, he said, right around the age of 14. He produced scores of phony historical documents to make money, but also, I wanted to change Mormon history. And he lied because I was interested to see how the church would react. The church responded today during a news conference.
The attitude of the church leaders has never been that of suspicion. The attitude of the church leaders in the main is an attitude of trust.
Some of Hofmann's documents supported church history and strengthened the faithful, but others challenged traditional accounts and sent historians scurrying to reinterpret the Mormon past. Meantime, the media jumped on the bandwagon with headlines that spokesman Richard Lindsay today called unjustly demeaning.
We have had a coverage of these documents which indeed have cast aspersions and doubts upon the divine authenticity of the church. And in that sense, it's taken 2 years to be able to respond to some of those kind of headlines.
In the transcript, Hofmann portrayed church leaders as being anxious to buy certain documents to hide them, and in Hofmann's words, prevent them from falling into the enemy's hands. Today, Richard Lindsay couldn't identify the enemy and said there's no church policy of obtaining documents and hiding them for any reason. So who do we believe?
Well, in terms of who was mistaken and who was lying, I'd let the record speak for itself.
The LDS Church believes it has a divine mandate to preserve its history, and Lindsay said the church has followed time-honored practices and relied on competent authorities to fulfill that mandate.
These recent tragic experiences strongly reaffirm that any accurate, objective history or commentary on the church requires an understanding of the spiritual powers attending this divine work.
Despite the Hofmann scandals, Lindsay said the church is healthy, robust, and growing stronger.
Certainly these have been troubling times to our members in trying to understand this in context. So I would say rather than turning them around and having that effect, it will certainly ease the burden of the minds of many people who have been troubled by these events.
New York City in 1984. A quiet, unimposing Mormon documents collector from Utah says he found something amazing in this Manhattan bookstore. The first document ever printed in the New World, the Oath of a Freeman, a Pilgrim Manifesto dated 1638.
In my mind, this is one of the most important historical documents of our country.
With that, Mark Hofmann arrived in the big leagues. He loaned the Oath of a Freeman to the Schiller and Wapner Gallery on New York's Upper East Side, a chic address with clients like actress Katharine Hepburn. The oath underwent a battery of tests. The FBI laboratories found no evidence of forgery. Neither did a cyclotron test at the University of California. The Library of Congress said the document is worth $1.5 million, and there are interested buyers. Some sources say the Oath of a Freeman was about to be sold just as the bombings began, and the deal literally exploded. Months later, Hofmann was charged with murder and forgery, but the oath was not part of the case. However, a New York grand jury conducted a separate investigation to see if Hofmann forged the Oath of a Freeman. The investigation was called off as part of Hoffman's plea bargain. The victims in that fraud case would have been Schiller and Wapner, but they found it impossible to believe.
It is a forgery. Is it a good forgery? To have passed so much testing by so many people, it's an incredible forgery.
Schiller and Wapner were so convinced the oath was authentic, they loaned Hofmann other valuable documents to buy or trade, letters from historic figures and first edition books by famous authors, each worth thousands. Some have been sold, others remain in police custody. Now, Hofmann has confessed to forging the Oath of a Freeman, and Schiller and Wapner are among the biggest losers in the forgery scheme. In his confessions, Hofmann talks about obvious telltale signs in the oath that should have immediately alerted the experts that it may be a forgery. Specifically, Hofmann says some of the printed characters in the oath overlap or don't match up with each other in a perfectly straight line. The experts should have known that such overlapping is impossible on the Pilgrim press where the oath was printed. Schiller and Wapner would not talk to us this week on camera, but Schiller did tell us that while Mark Hofmann is clearly a master forger, he is also clearly a master liar, so he doesn't give Hofmann's confessions much credibility. Now, Schiller and Wapner say they are awaiting the results of more tests on the ink and the paper before they pass final judgment on the Oath of a Freeman. Consaris, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
In 1978, CBS Television aired a 4-part miniseries based on the novel The Word. It told of an imprisoned Frenchman who was betrayed by a priest. In an elaborate tale of revenge, the character, Robert Lebrun, creates a forgery aimed at discrediting the Bible. Lebrun forges the supposed lost book of James, a new gospel. Then he plants the forgery, knowing it will be uncovered by an archaeologist.
And he made a discovery that's going to change history. He discovered some antique documents, over a dozen papyrus leaves that tell a story that's going to dazzle the Christian world.
Is Mark Hofmann a real-life Robert Lebrun? Utah State University archivist Jeff Simmons says he and Hofmann discussed both the movie and the book 2 years before Hofmann built the LDS Church with the so-called Anthon transcript.
We talked a while. I said, well, when I get ready to retire, I'm going to forge the ultimate Nauvoo diary and sell it to BYU. I thought that was really witty. Mark, of course, went out and did it.
There are parallels between the Word and the Hofmann fraud. Like Hofmann, the fictional character Lebrun stole blank pages from manuscripts of the period.
Robert Lebrun, in The Word, talks about raiding various musea in Europe to find papyri from the 1st century, 1st and 2nd century.
And Mark Hofmann
did that with paper taken from the end sheets of books and special collections at the University of Utah and here.
University of Utah officials said they didn't know that Hofmann stole end sheets from these books until Hofmann revealed it during his interviews. Hofmann also told investigators he mixed and aged his own ink, as did Lebrun.
For ink, I used a special aging chemical with lamp black and vegetable gum, the very formula used by the scribes from 30 through to 62 AD.
Hofmann admits spending days, even weeks, in libraries researching the text, the content of his forgeries, possibly taking another page from the novel.
Almost every concept in my forgery was based on authentic ancient manuscripts.
Both the fictional Lebrun and the real-life Hofmann used experts in the staged discovery of their forgeries. Hofmann used Jeff Simmons himself, setting up Simmons to witness the removal of the Anthon transcript Hofmann sealed between the pages of an old Bible. In The Word, Lebrun plants the papyri so an Italian professor finds it. Further, in both cases, noted experts carefully checked and authenticated the forgeries. Hofmann fooled the likes of Charles Hamilton, who wrote a book on detecting forgeries, Kenneth Rendell, the man who debunked the forged Hitler diary, the FBI laboratory, and the University of California Davis's sophisticated cyclotron. The mythical Lebrun also fooled the best.
Some of the most learned experts in the world have already authenticated the writings of James the Just.
Their egos would not let them do otherwise.
There's one big difference between fiction and real life. In the novel, the forger is murdered. In the Hofmann scam, the forger is the murderer. Lynn Packer, Eyewitness News.
On June 11th, David Raskin, Charles Hans, and Ron Yengich sat with Mark Hofmann in a conference room at the state prison. The question: how did Mark Hofmann mask the results of his lie detector test, even under the skilled hands of polygraph expert Dr. Charles Hans?
There are people who are pathological liars, or psychopaths, sociopaths is the technical term, but the research indicates that those people are not able to manipulate the outcome of a polygraph test.
But Raskin claims Mark Hofmann, even under a broader definition, is not a pathological liar, nor did he try some of the more routine tricks, like biting his tongue or pressing down his toes at just the right time.
He told us about his history when he was about 12, 13 years old. He's a very curious, technologically sophisticated individual. And he built himself a device to measure his skin resistance, the galvanic skin response, which is the main component of a polygraph test. And he did this with a meter and a battery and a simple circuit, which you can get out of Popular Mechanics or something like that. And then he practiced controlling his skin resistance. Now, this had nothing to do with polygraph tests or lie detectors. He was just a young kid experimenting with controlling his bodily reactions. He then told us that he developed an ability by studying hypnosis to hypnotize himself using self-hypnotic techniques. And he found that when he was in that hypnotic state, he could control his skin resistance even more so that he could cause himself not to react to things. He used these techniques over the years to control the experience of pain and going to the dentist, not taking anesthetics, and for a variety of other situations where he was feeling stress. So he had been practicing these techniques for maybe 20 years when he came upon the situation to take a polygraph test. And then he told us the night before the test, he hypnotized himself so that he could convince himself in that state that he was not responsible for the bombings. And when he took the polygraph test, just before he took the test, he did that again. And he told us that during the test then, when asked the questions about the bombings, he was able to believe that he was answering truthfully when he denied being involved at a subconscious level.
If what Hofmann claims is true, his technique so far exceeds anything anyone has tried in the laboratory.
Regarding whether you took that ring from the desk,
Do you intend to answer all of the questions truthfully?
yes.
As demonstrated here, graduate students often experiment with the polygraph. But Mark Hofmann knew how to underreact to questions about the bombings, then overreact to control questions that are intentionally used to identify a polygraph hoax.
Looking at those charts, they look like pretty bona fide polygraph charts, and they were sent around the country to many experts who reviewed them and said, yes, they were truthful appearing charts. So apparently he was able to do something very unusual, which is to suppress his reactions to the relevant questions, the ones about the bombings. This is something we haven't seen before. There is no good scientific literature which would indicate that this is possible. If anybody could repeatedly produce an erroneous result, it would be Mark Hofmann. I've never seen an individual like this.
That conversation on June 11th here at the state prison produced some other interesting insights about the psychology of Mark Hofmann. David Raskin claims some of Hoffman's answers revealed more about his personality than expected.
He was, of course, I think, trying to convey to us a lot about himself, that he's a clever individual, that he's a curious, scientifically oriented individual, but that he's not a vicious person. I think it comes through very clearly that he had a lot of misgivings about what he did. On the other hand, he, I think, feels proud of the fact that he is so clever. I mean, naturally he would be. He fooled the FBI laboratory with all the documents, and he beat a polygraph test from a very well-credentialed and experienced professional person.
Raskin would like to study Mark Hofmann, exploring what he calls the limits of his abilities. Despite the crimes, David Raskin believes Mark Hofmann could help behavioral scientists understand how a clever mind manipulates machines and men whose expertise is seldom pooled. Ed Yates, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
Linda Silito left her keyboard at the Deseret News 2 years ago for this one so she could devote herself to the Hofmann story.
I am in it so deep that I just can't see out of it.
Has it consumed your life?
Yes.
Silito and colleague Alan Roberts seem to be ahead right now in the race to publish the first Hofmann book. They are in experienced company. Right now, there are 3 major books planned on the Hofmann murders. Silito and Roberts, for local publisher Signature Books, may publish by the 1st of next year. They are negotiating paperback rights. New York Times reporter Robert Lindsay is working on the book for Simon & Schuster. He wrote The Falcon and the Snowman, which became a major motion picture. And New York author Steve Nafee is also writing the story. It's not his first book. Lindsay sold movie rights to 20th Century Fox over a year ago, but he says they may not produce the movie since Nafee already contracted a CBS miniseries. Many big publishers turned Nafee down when he proposed a Hofmann story, saying it was too confusing and too clean. It lacks sex. But he is sure that this is his bid to be the next Norman Mailer or Truman Capote.
This is perhaps, short of a major spy scandal, the most complicated and an interesting case we could possibly have taken up.
His research fills an office.
Just from the law enforcement standpoint, it's a fascinating case. The prosecution was interesting. You've got an extremely colorful and very able defense attorney fighting a host of prosecutors, and there's a lot of interesting stories. The county attorney's office was in a certain amount of turmoil at that time, as you well know, and beyond that, the media is an interesting story. KSL plays a very interesting role in this, in the whole story.
Nafee says his book will be written for a commercial national audience, not only for people who live in Utah. Silito and Roberts will market their work nationally, but say it will have also enough detail for insiders on the case and those familiar with Utah culture.
Alan and I see ourselves as unmasking that deception, as trying to tell the truth of what happened during the Hofmann years from about 1980 to 1985.
While others negotiate film rights, Silito and Roberts say their motivation is not money. Roberts is an architect, sleuthing part-time. Silito changed careers, but they say their mission is the message, to explain why.
Our main interest, and it's always been this way, is just to do a good book and to cover the story and to do it completely and responsibly and make the interpretation useful to the community. And we really haven't been extra excited about movies and things.
All cultures have aberrations and extremes, but I just feel that we have to understand those things. And that we, instead of understanding them, we tend to deny them. We tend to say, well, these people are freaks, you know, or they're extremists, or they're crazy. And with this one, I just thought, look, this is right in the heart. These are nice people getting killed and purportedly doing the killing. You know, this is right in the shadows of the church administration building. If we can't understand this one, then we're never going to understand ourselves. It's not just understanding Mark Hofmann, it's understanding all of us.
As in the stories of Gary Gilmore and Francis Schroeder, we will again see a glimpse of our community in prime time. We'll read about it in hardcover. It's certain, though, that this story won't really end until the people working hard to tell it have written their last word.
A mystery writer couldn't have dreamed up a more interesting situation.
It was a mystery story, and like all good mysteries, each answer generated dozens of questions, and that drove everybody to write more.
We were full tilt boogie from day one. For probably 3 or 4 months, I don't think I worked on anything else.
It was the most demanding and intimidating story I'd ever covered.
The Tribune's Mike Carter and the Deseret News' Jan Thompson wrote hundreds of Hofmann stories.
It was the first time ever as a reporter that I just wrote to what I thought the story merited instead of being told you have so many lines. And the satisfying thing about it was that readers read it.
And people couldn't read enough. They listened to every new twist on the radio. On TV, they watched each day's developments as though the Hofmann story was some grim and fascinating soap opera.
And there was so much to do early on, and so many people you had to talk to. And they all had little snippets of information.
And then we finally discovered what the whole thing was all about, but there was still so much secret and speculative information that it just bred itself into a major story.
A couple of reporters said it was a feeding frenzy. The competition was fierce. In the rush to print, under the pressure to make air, they admit they reported some things that, in retrospect, deserved more careful scrutiny.
They had to address the bombings, they had to address the motives, the forgeries, the people, the businesses, everything involved, and it was very difficult to say what it all meant and to pull it together.
Reporters also turned investigators. To get a scoop, they followed leads of their own instead of waiting to report what authorities were willing to say. Prosecutors are still bitter about the night KSL TV News interviewed an eyewitness who fingered Mark Hofmann as the man who set the bomb that killed Stephen Christensen.
I didn't even know it in a second if he had that jacket on.
We held our own lineup with a witness before the police were able to do that. And I'm not sure that we should have done that.
Prosecutor Bob Stott says, from his vantage point, the coverage was absurd because on the Hofmann story, the media threw out all the rules.
You know, I was amazed. Not only did we have a story every day about what was going on, but there was even days when there was no story, that there was a story, that there was no story. And to me, that was an obsession that went beyond the bounds of rationalization.
Did the media hurt what you did?
In the long run, no. In the short run, yes. It was more difficult to accumulate the evidence.
Did the media learn from this case? Prosecutors Stott and Biggs say no. And reporters say they do the same thing all over again.
The story was so inherently sensational. We had bombs going off, we had bodies, we had the church was involved, or at least apparently involved. The cops weren't talking. We had our suspect who was such a clean-cut young man. I think that overall, though, the media did what it does best, and that's just get the information out.
I don't think we handled ourselves half as badly as some people think we did, and I think to a great extent there were some very good, informative, well-researched, and well-done stories in regard to the Hofmann case.
I guess the bottom line is that you felt that you were writing history.
Of the hundreds of Hofmann stories, there's still one everybody wants.
Sure. Talk to Mark Hofmann. Sit down and ask Mark Hofmann the why. Why did it happen? Why did he do it?
Keith McCord, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
I have trouble with that, with putting Hofmann into the category of a master forger. Master at a hoax, yes. I mean,
Rendell believes Hofmann fooled people for so long because of who he fooled, rather than his expertise in forging documents.
He wasn't coming out into the what I call the regular market. He wasn't coming to New York and going and seeing sophisticated collectors or trying to sell to me. He never tried to sell me, he never offered me anything. As far as I know, he never offered any dealers any material. He never ran the risk of having anybody uncover any of this. He only dealt with local people.
Rendell says those local Salt Lake people were too trusting, relying too heavily on Hofmann's self-professed devotion to the Mormon Church. Hofmann's attorney says there was more to it than mere trust.
I think Mark Hofmann is a good lesson for people. Deceit and greed, not only on his part, but on other people's part in this case. There's a lesson to be learned there, and I think people can learn from him.
There's talk that the whole Hofmann affair is turning the country's historic documents industry upside down.
There is no effect on the business. People view this as a local thing that happened in Salt Lake City. Fascinating story. But as one major dealer said to me, it just shows what happens when people don't buy from professionals.
Rendell admits the printed Hofmann documents, such as the Oath of a Freeman, the Jim Bridger Notes, and the Deseret Currency, are another story altogether. In fact, experts in those areas are already scheduling major conferences across the country to try and figure out how to keep this sort of thing from happening again. Until Hofmann came along, few people thought there were enough Mormon documents around to make any real money dealing in them. But as Rendell put it, Hofmann found the ultimate way to match supply with demand. Dave Schmertz, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
Elder Dallin Oaks came to BYU today to represent the LDS Church at the Symposium on Church History and the Hofmann forgeries, and to deliver the official church response to issues surrounding the Hofmann case.
In the course of this episode, we have seen some of the most sustained and intense LDS church bashing since the turn of the century.
Elder Oaks pointed the finger at several national publications, including the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times.
While various newspaper writers were accusing the church of suppression of historical documents, some of these same papers were actually involved in perpetrating a cover-up of their own.
Elder Oaks accused the Los Angeles Times of intentionally concealing the truth about Mark Hofmann's dealings with the church from its readers. He said they suppressed certain letters to the editor and failed to correct misrepresentations about a fictitious Oliver Cowdery history. On other issues, Elder Oaks said the church hasn't suppressed information, but has been open about its dealings with Hofmann. He said those dealings with top church leaders was limited, that Hofmann didn't have ready access to the Mormon hierarchy. And he responded to the question of how Hofmann could have deceived the church leadership.
In order to perform their personal ministries, church leaders cannot be suspicious and questioning of each of the hundreds of people they meet each year. It is better for a church leader to be occasionally disappointed than to be constantly suspicious.
Elder Oaks concluded his talk tonight with a comment that surfaced repeatedly during this day-long symposium. The scholars said it, and he said it. We all need to be more cautious. Dwayne Cardall, Eyewitness News, Provo.
That you've seriously got to re-examine yourselves, your motives, your methods. And if nothing else, I suppose that re-examination is the most significant thing that have come out of the Mark Hofmann forgeries.
Deputy Salt Lake County Attorney Robert Stott caused a stir with his suggestion, but the scholars seemed ready to accept it.
We contributed to Hofmann's career.
Perhaps as much as anyone, Dean Jesse feels the brunt of Hofmann's scam. He helped authenticate numerous documents, including the controversial Salamander letter.
In reflecting upon my involvement with the Harris letter, I don't know of much I would have done different under the circumstances.
But Jesse and the others who spoke today all said scholars need to be much more careful in the future.
Perhaps our scholars and archivists will learn to be more critical of their sources. They should understand and apply the test of provenance to all of their sources, and be especially suspicious of any documents that do not have a clear and proven provenance.
Mark Hofmann avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to second-degree murder, and most Utahns don't like it.
4 out of 5 oppose the deal. Only 16% agree with it. The man who approved the plea bargain says the public has the benefit of hindsight and Hofmann's confession.
Well, I think if we would have had Mark Hofmann's confession with regard to the homicides prior to any plea negotiations, in other words, he had sat down in Pete Hayward's office or Bud Willoughby's office and confessed, we probably would have not entered into the plea bargain. We probably would have gone for the death penalty. But that didn't happen.
But a majority believes the state got shortchanged on Hofmann's confession. Only 38% believe Hofmann told the truth about the murders.
Well, I think we know pretty much the whole truth on the whys and the hows with regard to the 2 bombs. I still think that there's a question mark in my mind and my prosecutors' minds and the police minds and the public's minds on what the 3rd bomb was intended for, and we may never know that.
On the other hand, a solid majority does believe Hofmann told the truth about his forgeries. In fact, David Yoakum says the investigation and the prison interviews unmasked one of the greatest forgery schemes ever.
And I think that it has alerted everyone that is involved in the document authentication and police work involving documents. Many of the techniques that were developed will uncover forgeries, I think, for into the next century at least.
Would that have been possible without the plea bargain?
I don't think it would have been.
Yoakum says the plea bargain didn't accomplish everything he'd hoped, but if he had it to do all over again, he'd do the same thing. The public may not agree, Yoakum says, but the prosecutors believed it was the best move they had, considering the evidence that was available. John Hollenhorst, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.
The documents expert was there, George Throckmorton. He helped crack open the case. Ken Farnsworth, the cop who led the murder investigation, showed up. So did some of the victims of the crimes, like Al Rust, the coin dealer. The main character wasn't there, but his work was the forgeries of Mark Hofmann, a sampling of them at least, on public display for the first time.
It's a chance for the public to see some of the things that the media talked about for so long. And we have about 15 forgeries that are all in Hofmann's handwriting, and you can actually see a similarity with them.
The occasion, a reception for the authors of a 3-week-old book on the Hofmann case, hosted by the Cosmic Aeroplane bookstore. Cosmic Aeroplane, ironically, once bought forged documents from Mark Hofmann. The book has sold well, nationally and locally. There are 2 other books in the works, and talk of a movie or 2. Evidence that the forgery murder case has potentially broad commercial appeal in the entertainment media. There's another irony here. Some of Hofmann's documents went from priceless pieces of history to worthless forgeries. Now, as the case gains more national notoriety, they're becoming valuable again, as remnants of a sensational murder case and as the work of a master forger. Consaris, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.